Hello, hello. Yoo-hoo. Yoo-hoo, Mrs. Kietzel. Hello. Hello. We are starting the program for our banquet. First of all, I would really like to appreciate the work of the staff here, the wait staff, who's been doing a great job. Thank you all very much, you guys. And one announcement, we know if you look at the program that after this banquet there's kind of a party and we're retiring over to the Curry Club where Barb Jensen and Friends is going to have a set of music over there, and the liquor will flow, I can't say freely, but it will flow to the degree that you can pay for it. So what we need to get over there is cars. So if you have a car around here, not back in Kansas City, you have a car, please be right over here after the program so we can match you up with people who need rides to get over there. So please do help us get our crew and all of us over to the Curry Club, which is just about a mile away from here, and a good time will continue there. So we have here tonight really, in addition to all the tremendous presentations and presenters, I want to make special attention that we have in the house the Long Island Federation of Labor. And Roger Clayman is here as Executive Director of the Long Island Fed. And Charlene Obernauer is over there, also from the Long Island Jobs with Justice chapter. And Michelle Lynch from 1199 on Long Island, the political director of the work here, to all and everybody else from the Long Island Fed over there. Thank you very much for all you do for working people on the island and for being here this evening. I also want to make special thanks to Patty Vera. Many of you have heard from her, all of you have heard from her. Patty, stand up. Hey, there she is.
Stand up! Stand up!
Stand up! Stand up! Hey! And we have also, thanks really to the Dean of the Graduate School here, provided money so that we could pay our graduate students to work staff at the conference and also attend the conference. And I hope that you will have had good experience with our graduate students who are working at the registration table and going and picking people up at the airport and solving very many problems. So they're all back there. And we also have Nick Coles here, who's the president of the Working Class Studies Association. Where is that man?
Stand up next.
Hey!
Yes.
And we have, I'm very happy to say, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here, Nancy Squires, who's just a very important friend of the Center for Study of Working Class Life and of Working Class Studies and what we're doing. And sort of in that vein, I just want to say something to give you an idea of what's brewing here, although we don't have any idea where it's going. We don't know if it's going to work. We don't know what's happening, but it is a good development, and Nancy, Dean Squires here, has had something more than a little bit to do with it. The university here at Stony Brook has decided, as so many places around the country, that in addition to hiring people on individual lines in different departments, we're going to try to establish what are called cluster hires, where we establish particular areas of inquiry that can be approached from different angles, from different departments, to have really interdepartmental, multidisciplinary research, teaching, graduate instruction, and a synergy that can happen that is very important often in really solving or getting at difficult problems. So working through the Center for Study of Working Class Life with the Economics Department, with Sociology, with History, Cultural Analysis and Theory, with the Hispanic Languages and Literature, and with the Philosophy Department. Those 6 departments and the Center have come together to propose a cluster hire in working class studies. And We've come through some initial screening, and the dean has been very helpful and instrumental in that, although there was sort of other peer review and different committees that got put together to look at these things. The provost invited us to submit a proposal, and Tuesday, just before the conference began, we did put together a proposal, which is now in the provost's office, and we have no idea where it will in the end land or what the result will be, but I did want you to know that here at Stony Brook, particularly in the College of Arts and Sciences, particularly among the people who are sitting in this room and with the dean and with his friends in other places in the university, working class studies may very well have a good future here at Stony Brook. We have in the program tonight no dinner speaker. Yeah. That's because we have about 4 of them. This conference, the How Class Works conference, this is the 6th in a series that began in 2002. Some of you have been here for that, for all of them. Others of you have been where you could, and others of you, you're new here this year. So whoever you are, I want to welcome you here for these sessions and for the program that we have. But what we're doing here tonight is really running 2 parallel tracks. We're running one track for the Working Class Studies Association, which is kind of the professional society of the academics and the artists and the community activists and the labor organizers who are devoted to building working class studies. So the Working Class Studies Association has a series of awards that they give. And so we're going to hear about that shortly. And then after that, we're going to also make 2 presentations that the Center for Study of Working Class Life has done since 2004 at every conference. We give 2 awards for what we call lifetime contributions to social justice for working people. And we think that we need to recognize people who have really devoted their lives, whether it's in the arts, or whether it's in union organizing, or whether it's in academic life, or whether it's out there in the communities, to advancing economic and social justice for working people. Those people need recognition, and we're happy to do that. And we will do that this evening for 2 really very strong and powerful voices and beacons to us all. But before we get to that part, I want to introduce Fred Gardefeu, who is the immediate past president of the Working Class Studies Association, whose task ex officio in that position is to organize the awards process for the Working Class Studies Association. This is Fred Gardefeu.
Thank you, everybody. I'll be brief because I want the awardees to have a few words with their thank yous. The Working Class Studies Association offers awards for books, articles, media, and it's a daunting task to run the awards. First thing I want to say is anybody who's out there who's not a member of the Working Class Studies Association, please think about becoming a member of the association because, yes, because it's your dues that helps create these. Now, the awards we're giving are not monetary awards, and that was one of the things that somebody asked me when they applied for the awards, is there any money involved? And I said, no, it's recognition. And most of the everybody actually who won the award was very happy. I sent out a press release of the awards to all the major, Chronicle of Higher Ed and so on. New York Times was the only one who called me up, actually, and said, how many members are in your organization? And I said, we have 150 members. So I said 15,000. And they told me it wasn't big enough. So please get everybody to involve. All right. Each year we issue a number of awards to recognize the best new work in the field of working class studies. The review process is organized by me, or the past president. Next year will be Nick Coles. The results are in for the 2012, which is for books that were published and articles that were published in 2011. I'm going to name the awards, and there's only 3 members here tonight. I don't know if they're actually members, but 3 recipients here tonight of the awards. The first award is the Constance Coiner Award for Best Dissertation. I don't know how many of you remember Connie Coiner. I met her through the Youngstown conferences, and she died on the TWA flight that is recognized out here on Long Island. And whenever a plane crashes, I never think anything twice about it because I don't know anybody on the plane. This time, it turned out I actually knew somebody on that plane. It was Connie and her daughter. She was taking her daughter to France for the first time, and I was devastated. But I was devastated like 2 months after the event. Anyway, this award is given in her name. This year, the award winner is Jamie K. McCollum from Middlebury College. Now, before I bring Jamie up, I want to read the judge's comments. The title of his dissertation was In Dubious Battle, a Case Study for the New Labor Transnationalism. And the judge's comments include, this is by Irvin Peckman, who's professor of rhetoric and composition at Louisiana State University. Do you know him, Jim? Jim does probably not know. You know him. Good.
Yes, I know.
Irving agreed. Wonderful guy. I pulled him out of a hat. He says, In Dubious Battle exemplifies careful, important research on the current dilemma of labor markets and transnational economic structures. McCallum gives us a close reading of a specific situation and links it to a broader structures of labor and the new order. Now, Peter Vellon, who's not as much of a superstar as Irvin is, says, Jamie McCollum offers an important case study and in many ways a potential blueprint toward addressing one of global society's most pressing issues, the diminishing power of the working class. Offering an analysis that breaks free of rigid narratives that view labor weakness as an inevitable result of global capitalism, In Dubious Battle illustrates how global union campaigns can work on the local, national, global level. Conducting close to 100 interviews in 9 different countries, McCallum's dissertation is well-researched and provides a critical window into the lives of everyday workers in the global arena. Now, on behalf of the Working Class Studies Association, I would like to present the Constance Coiner Award for Best Dissertation to Jamie Kisselblock McCollum for In Dubious Battle. Jamie.
Thanks, everyone.
Short speech.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything. I'll say one thing, and that is that 2 of my illustrious dissertation committee members are here tonight, Francis Fox Piven and Stanley Aronowitz. I owe a lot to them, and so thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Good job. Okay, the next award is the CLR James Award for Published Article or Essay for Academic or General Audiences, and this goes to Stephen Breyer, the Graduate Center of City University of New York, and Ferdinando Fasce, University of Genoa, for their article entitled Italian Militants and Migrants in the Language of Solidarity in the Early 20th Century Western Coalfields, and it was published in Labor Studies and Working Class History of the Americas. Now here's the judge's comments. Jerome Crace, who's emeritus and Murray Koppelman Professor of Brooklyn College, the all-around excellence of this essay puts it at the top of a heap of worthy candidates. I was especially impressed with the ability of the authors to neatly blend in clear, concise language, which is weird for an academic, right? A multitude of perspectives on a complex subject. And the next comes from Gerald Meyer, who's Emeritus Professor of History at Hostos Community College in CUNY. And Jerry says, Italian Militants and Migrants is a prize-winning article. In a clearly written study, Breyer and Fasce trace the activities of Carlo De Moli, an immigrant from Lombardia, whose activities as a trade union journalist and agitator in Western Coalfield reinforce some and challenge other assumptions about the role of Italian immigrants in the organization of the multi-ethnic coal miners around the turn of the century. Strewn throughout the article are insights on a wide range of issues that, in other hands, would in themselves have constituted separate articles. By weaving the narrative of this dramatic piece of American labor and American immigrant history around the biography of Damoli and Il Lavatore Italiano, the union newspaper for which he worked, the authors add something quite rare to their monograph literary quality. The CLR James Award for Published Article or Academic General Audiences goes to Stephen Breyer and Ferdinando Fasci.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to accept this award from this organization for myself and my colleague and collaborator, Nando Fasci. Oh, sorry. That's rarely a problem that I have. I'm happy to accept this award from this organization, which I think a great deal about and think does very important work for myself and my colleague, Fernando Fasci.
Yes, it is. Yes, it's a unidirectional.
Let me try to get it. There we go. There we go. That better? Okay. I won't say it a third time. Thank you for the award. I'm particularly pleased to get the CLR James Award because of how much I respect his work, but it has double meaning for me. My father was a British, tough, street-fighting communist, and CLR James was someone very, very important in his world and his life. So my father, who's up there in working class heaven, is looking down very happily when I got this award. Is that
it? All right, before I introduce the final award that's here, I'm going to introduce the people who are not here. The Studs Terkel Award for Media and Journalism went to J. Malcolm Garcia, who's a freelance journalist in Winnetka, Illinois, for actually a series of articles. They actually sent in 3 articles. One's called Smoke Signals, They Survived in Iraq and Died at Home, which was published in the Oxford American. Another one called Smokescreen, which was published in Guernica, a magazine of art and politics. And another article called Breathing In, which was published in Virginia Quarterly Review. I'm going to read one judge's comments. He says, "These pieces individually and collectively are incredible. Reporting from the trenches literally, here is nonfiction writing that ranks with the best of fiction. Most importantly, it is written with empathy, compassion, and engagement. Unlike most war reporting, it recognizes the realities and horrors visited upon the Afghans as well as the U.S. grunts. Pulitzer stuff this is." So that was the Studs Terkel Award for Media and Journalism. And the Creative Writing Award went to Mary Bucci Bush for her book called Sweet Hope. And I'm not going to read from the judge's comments because they're way too long, but I'm going to tell you that this is a book that finally looks at Italian-American, the history of Italian-Americans as they came to the United States to replace African-Americans in the plantations. A famous plantation called the Sunnyside Plantation, Mary Bucci Bush, and actually there's, we have, I think the only judge. Well, Kitty Krupat's here. She was a judge, and Gerald McCarthy was a judge in the Creative Writing Award. So Mary Bucci Bush won it for Sweet Hope. And the final award that I have here goes to Franco Barchiese for who's a professor of African American and African Studies at Ohio State University. For his book called Precarious Liberation, Works, the State and Contested Social Citizenship in Post-Apartheid South Africa, African Studies, which was published by SUNY Press. And here's the comments from the judges. Here's one. A very ambitious and impressive theoretical analysis of the employment, Wage labor as a signifier of citizenship in a precarious post-apartheid economy, a big book with big ideas, certainly has the most intellectual heft of the lot. Secondly, from another judge, strongly grounded in ethnographic evidence and in theory, this important account of post-transition South Africa describes with great specificity a local phase of a world problem. Barchiese shows how precariousness emerged as a category without separating it from proletarianization entirely. And the final judge said, this book works to establish precariousness as a theoretical paradigm without sacrificing either concrete focus or the local or historical reach. It gives me great pleasure to give this award to Franco Barchiese, the CLR James Award for published book.
Thank you, Fred. Yeah, well, I really don't have a lot to say. It's really a huge honor for me to win this CLR James Award of the Working Class Studies Association. I mean, an organization of which I have been a member since it started, I think. And it's an honor because, precisely because that's what, in fact, the book is about. I mean, it is about working class and working class struggles as part of a kind of comprehensive understanding of working class life, culture, and material and symbolic practices in the context of South Africa. And, well, I guess most of my speech would go into acknowledgments for the many contributions that have made this book possible. I have researched this book when I was working and teaching in South Africa in the Department of Sociology at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, and I would really like to thank all my colleagues, both in the Department of Sociology and in the Sociology of Work program. Truly a world-class research observatory on labor and labor struggles. I would like to thank especially my mentor and doctoral advisor, Professor Eddie Webster. And most importantly, I would like to thank the many, many comrades in various South African trade unions that have selflessly helped me, assisted me at all stages of this research project. I would like to thank the many, many workers, more than 200 of them, that have shared with me stories and tales of struggle and how they are coping with what is an extremely adverse transition in terms of conditions for the South African working class. Finally, it's actually quite wonderful that Stanley Aronowitz is here tonight, because Stanley actually hosted me when I was doing my research for the book, so I would also like to thank him for his help. And yeah, and I would guess that's very much it. Thank you. Thank you.
And for the first time in this category, there was a co-winner, which goes to Sean Burns, who describes himself as a teacher, musician, and gardener, for his book called Archie Green, The Making of a Working Class Hero, was published by University of Illinois Press. One of the judges says this is an accessible, exceptionally researched biography which manages to offer both appreciation and critique, and to capture the very complex political and intellectual sources of Green's energy and ideas. This would also honor Green, probably the greatest practitioner of working class studies in our times. And that's it for the Working Class Studies Awards. I want to thank you very much and turn it over to Mike now.
So, we have tonight two award winners for this award for lifetime contributions to social justice for working people. The first award, because we decided to do this in alphabetical order, is Stanley Aronowitz. And to talk about Stanley a little bit, we have Frances Fox Piven, who won this award 2 years ago as an outstanding contributor to social justice for working people over the course of a very fruitful and very wonderful lifetime of work. So Frances couldn't be here last time, but here she is.
Thank you, Mike, and the other people who make this great conference on how class works possible, for giving me a chance to make up for my absence last time.
Into the mic.
Are you hearing me? Oh, good, good, good. It's a great pleasure to be here because I think this conference is so important. We need to get together to reconnoiter, figure out what we're doing wrong, what we're doing right, what we could do better, and how we can deal with the Wisconsin election results. So, thank you, Mike, and the other people who make it possible for us to get together each year. But I'm especially glad for my role at this event, which is to introduce my longtime comrade and colleague, Stanley Aronowitz, and to explain to you briefly why he deserves this award for lifetime contributions to social justice for working class people. He really does deserve it. And let me explain briefly why. First, Stanley is an academic, as I am. He is a distinguished professor at the City University of New York. He's worked at other universities, and he's made a name for himself as an academic. But you know, we academics make names for ourselves by writing books and by becoming specialists on esoteric subjects. Stanley has done that with a vengeance. He's written a lot of books on a lot of subjects. Stanley is an acknowledged expert on, for example, the sociology of education, on the sociology and theory of education, on Marxist theory, a book like Crisis in Historical Materialism, on the sociology of science. He wrote a book called Science's Power, published by the University of Minnesota Press. He did a lot of books on a lot of subjects. He was glittering all over the place. But consistently, Stanley's most important work, and the work to which he always returned, was work on class and on working people. He has been renowned for that academic work for 40 years, something like that. He is the author, for example, of books like The Jobless Future with Bill DeFazio, which was a prescient book. He was the author very early of a book on labor called False Promises, which had False Promises, which had enormous influence, well, not yay exactly, which had enormous influence on our understanding of the dilemmas of the labor movement. And he also wrote From the Ashes of the Old, American Labor and the American Future. This was an important body of scholarly work examining the dilemmas of the contemporary American labor movement, and a body of work that was open to critiques of the American labor movement. So that's one reason that he deserves this award. But another reason is that he was not just an academic. Stanley was never just an academic. In fact, he began his working life. He was head of a school, a high school. Stanley will explain that to you. But then he worked as an associate director of mobilization for youth, and he had a series of union jobs. He worked in the labor movement. Stanley was an academic ultimately, but he was also a labor functionary and a labor activist. So I want to say a word about Stanley as a labor activist. I admire people, by the way, who do the everyday drudgery of keeping the labor movement going, and Stanley did that. But he was a labor activist, and he was this for 45 years. He showed that partly by the critical work he did on the labor movement, but he also did it with a kind of indomitable political spirit. Do you all remember when Stanley ran for governor of New York? I mean, who would have thought of running for governor of New York?
On the platform of tax and spend.
That's true. That's true. We should have done it. We should have voted for him. We probably did vote for him, but we were not enough. But you know what especially moves me about Stanley's political stance? You know, one foot in academia, the other foot in a moving labor movement. What especially moves me is the work he did with my own union, the Professional Staff Congress. Because I love my union. Stanley is part of why I love it. Stanley helped to make it into a gutsy little union, and we are little, I have to admit it. But Stanley stuck with that, and he went to the endless meetings. And since Stanley and I are both on the board of the Left Forum, I know about endless meetings with Stanley. But, you know, that's the kind of, we have to do that kind of work. And Stanley has done it, and he's done it because he is committed to an interpretation of the American experience which places the focus on class, and he is committed to social justice for working people. I give you Stanley Aronowitz.
Stanley, I just want to say a couple of words. Stanley is coming up here. I've known Stanley for almost 50 years. You know that in 1963 there was a big march on Washington where Martin Luther King gave this speech, "I Have a Dream." That march was a march for jobs and freedom. It wasn't just a civil rights march. It was a march for jobs and freedom. This guy here was the labor coordinator for that march. This guy here was responsible for going and getting the labor movement, which is how I got there, out of the UAW. And at the time I didn't know it, but I learned it later, and I wanted to thank Stanley for that. Another little piece that I have from Stanley is going back, again, to 1964. I was involved in SDS, Students for a Democratic Society. We decided to go off campus and to get into the communities and do some organizing. We chose Newark, New Jersey to do some organizing. How are we going to get into Newark? Call Stanley. He was working in North Jersey for, as a labor organizer, and he got us set up, and we worked together for quite a time and had quite a bit to do. And when Stanley ran for governor on the green ticket, his campaign slogan was tax and spend. So I give you Stanley Aronowitz. Stanley, I don't know what order to do this in, but I'm giving Stanley this plaque right now. There you go.
Thank you. And thanks to Fran And thanks to Mike and thanks to the committee for this award. I come from a long line of rank-and-file trade unionists. My grandfather, my great-uncle, my great-aunt, my mother were all rank-and-filers. We were never leaders. And although I was a staff member of the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union and the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union, I was always a shop steward, a grievance committee member. I was never a leader. We are, and just to say one thing about, we're sitting in Long Island. When I was an organizer for the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers, my base was in Roslyn, Long Island, where Local 8-149, whose president was Tony Mazzocchi, was prevailing, and the Long Island Fed is where I had a lot of relationships. So I'm very glad to be here with you all. I was asked by Mike in my brief remarks to say one or two things that I think are most important for us to know. And I'm going to say them, and I know that not everybody in this room is going to agree with me. But I think there is a discussion that needs to be done, that is beginning to be done, and I was at some panels this afternoon that actually began to have some of that discussion. The first point that I want to make is the most difficult. The trade union movement that exists today was largely born, said one of the commentators in one of the panels that I was with, that I attended, with the New Deal. That is to say, with 1933, 1934, 1935, whose summa was the National Labor Relations Act. I would like to suggest to you that what we need is a reconsideration of whether that trade union movement any longer is enough to meet the needs of working people. I am not arguing that unions are extinct or defunct. What I'm arguing is that the unions that were defined by the New Deal focused on the shop floor and on contracts, focused on the everyday business of taking care of people's grievances. But they became, over years, narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower. When Fran Piven, and thank you, Fran, that was overwhelming to me, said that I write about different things, one of the things, obviously, that I do write about is education. And science and technology, as well as on workers and labor. Is science and technology and education not a concern of the trade union or the labor movement as we know it? Do workers need to know more about science and technology, and their kids need to have decent education? Do we need a housing movement as part of the workers' movement? Do we need a broadening of what the labor movement represents? Now, one of the things I want you to consider, and I'm going to go on after this to one more point and then I'll stop, is that this movement was born to a large extent. There was a continuity of the AFL, and then there was a split. And that split took place in literally 1935, after two general strikes, one in Minneapolis and the other in San Francisco, and a national strike of the textile workers. That movement took place as a result of a split. Are we ready for another split? I'm just asking the question. That split did not take place entirely as a rank-and-file movement. I wanted to say that very clearly. David Dubinsky and Sidney Hillman, and especially John L. Lewis, were part and parcel of the old AFL? Are there people in the old AFL in 2012 who are ready to broaden the concerns of the labor movement? And it's not just a concern about education, and it's not just a concern about housing and health care and many of the other things that you all know about. The second question I want to raise, that movement that built this movement that we have today was not primarily an electoral movement. I am not attacking the idea of electoral action. But when we saw in Madison and Occupy Wall Street the beginning of a movement of direct action, we could have shut our eyes and gone back to 1934. That movement that built the industrial unions in this country, and that movement that literally built the public employees union movement, was built because people went to jail, because people demonstrated in the street. And if we don't go back to the streets, we're going to be lost. Now, this AFL-CIO is putting $400 million in 2012 into the National Democratic Party campaign and the congressional campaign. I wonder whether we could get more mileage in building our working people's movement by direct action, by organizing, by education, by building a housing movement, by building an education movement, by building a shop floor movement that doesn't rely on contracts in order to survive. I want to just say one more thing. The moment of contracts is not literally over, but the moment when we can expect that contracts will be the apex of working people's advances is over. We have to find new solutions. We have to find a new movement. And I'm so happy that you recognize me, because in the final analysis, I'm not one of your mainstream guys, you know. I'm just not. I never was. Mazzocchi and I'll say this, I didn't say this to anybody, the Occupational Safety and Health Act was born on Willis Avenue in Roslyn, Long Island, between Tony Mazzocchi and myself. Thank you.
Stanley.
Oh, I got to take my plaque. Right. Oh.
I tell you, being director of the center allows me to stand up and welcome and to listen to and to honor people like Stanley. And our next honoree here today, it gives me just tremendous pleasure and pride to be able to even do this and to have a university that makes this possible. But Dennis Surratt is an old comrade and friend and fellow struggler who's been through a lot of stuff. And before I bring, well, Gene, why don't you come up here? Gene Bruskin is going to have a few things to say, and I'll have a couple things to say, and we'll get Dennis up here to have 3 or 4 things to say. This is Gene Bruskin, who now is at the AFT, but if you remember the Smithfield strike and the struggle down in Smithfield in Tar Heel, North Carolina, that went on for 17 years and finally was driven to a successful conclusion. This is a guy who organized that struggle at Smithfield.
Thank you, Michael. So, you know, Dennis is a friend of mine, and I have to say that I was thinking of the long list of friends that I have who I became friends with after I voted for them for President of the United States, and I couldn't think of who else was on the list. But that was the case with Dennis, and he ran in 1984. That was the first time I sort of knew about him, and then I saw these posters in Boston of this sort of good-looking CWA union leader running for president. I think I voted for him, and then afterwards found out it was some weird party he was running with. And then he starts writing about what a weird party he ran for and that it was a mistake and that he's critiquing them after he runs for president. So I thought, this guy's an interesting guy. I want to get to know him. But by then, Dennis had already been a long-time veteran in the workers' movement, in the civil rights movement, in the social justice movement, the anti-war movement, really all the movements of the 60s and the 70s. And he was one of 10, he had 10 siblings, and really he was motivated originally by the murder of Emmett Till in the 50s, but grew up in Harlem. And he grew up at a time when, in the neighborhood where Malcolm X was walking the street and going in the coffee shop and holding rallies, and Dennis was there. And I think it rubbed off on him, and it's still on him right now. And he became active in all the movements that were taking place in Harlem in the 60s and the 70s, the movements to save the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. I don't think anyone wants to underestimate the importance of the Schomburg Center. The fight to prevent the closing of the Sydenham Hospital in Harlem, that they were trying to close, one of the major institutions there. And he became, early on in the 60s, he went to work for the phone company and became a CWA member, and right away became an organizer in the workplace and an active leader among black workers. And at a time when black workers were sort of being shunted aside in the labor movement still, Dennis decided to change that. And that's a role that he played throughout his entire career and still playing that role. He became eventually the vice president of CWA 1101, and in 1971 he led what is probably the longest strike in CWA history, 7 months. A 7-month strike of CWA workers. And he led it in fundamentally creating a coalition between black and Puerto Rican workers and bringing the white workers along. And he then, but for Dennis, the trade union work was never enough. It wasn't just the particular union, it was the whole movement. And he went on to found, in the early 70s with Bill Lucey, the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. And that was at a time when the Detroit Revolutionary Union movement and black workers all over this country were challenging racism in the labor movement and in the workplace, and the sort of some of the passivity of the labor movement that was developing then, and he was on the ground floor. Later in the 70s, Dennis was a CWA leader, and I think I got this right. Morty Barr had become the president of CWA. And he went to Dennis and he said, Dennis, listen, I'd like you to consider coming to the National Union. You know, and Dennis said, yeah. And he said, but there's this one issue here, this Palestinian stuff. You know, could you sort of tone that one down a little bit? And he looked at him like he was speaking Greek or something, you know, because Dennis just doesn't do that. He doesn't tone down what he believes on, and he turned that down. And that's something that not a lot of people have done. One thing that Dennis has always been, and in a movement where moderation is encouraged, is audacious. But he's always been audacious in a very lovable way. So you can be audacious and lovable, you can actually get a bit off, right? He moved to D.C., became president of a CWA local in Maryland for a number of years, and by the early 2000s he was moved up to the international, became the education director, then the international affairs director. And he, as the education director, he held a 2-week, not 2-day, 2-week minority union leadership training program every year. And if you left there and you weren't radicalized and about your view of the union, is like you were taking some kind of weird drugs during that time. So all of this time, one of Dennis's major accomplishments is that he has this incredible family. When Dennis gets a family reunion, you've heard of the 1,000,000-person march and the 1,000,000-man march. This is they have to hold it down on the mall with all the grandchildren and everything. This was, but this has always been. He's somehow always managed to be this wonderful father, grandparent. and his children are all active in social justice and other kinds of movement. His wife, Kathy Surrett, has been a lifelong activist, and that's sort of the difference between being a family and raising a family and being a part of the labor movement and the communities you live in is all one. So now Dennis is retired, although the word in fashion right now is redeployed, because you end up being retired, you get called on for everything because everybody knows you're not working, right? But now it turns out I was in his house and he's got these paintings all over his house. He's a painter. He's got all these beautiful artwork. So I had the pleasure of admiring that. He's been active in U.S. labor against the war. He's been active in the Occupy movement. And he's likely to be at the center of any kind of a conversation that's going to happen now or any time in the future about transforming this country to the advantage of the 99%. Dennis Surrett.
Well, I just want to say a couple of things. This morning, there was a plenary session in this room, and some of you were at that, and you remember that Amy Muldoon from CWA in Queens was here talking about her participation in the Occupy discussion for the May Day March that just happened in New York. And in the course of her remarks, she made reference to that 1971 strike of CWA. And when the program was over, I just happened to be around when Dennis came up to her and said, "You know that strike back in 1971? I led that strike." And I just thought, damn, look at this, what's going on here in this room, and how good is that? Now, among other things, Dennis and I share one thing, which is Emmett Till. Emmett Till was lynched in 1955 in Money, Mississippi. And the same pictures that Dennis saw in Jet, I saw in Life magazine. And the same influence that those pictures had for what it means to be a human being in America and what we have to do is something that Dennis and I share, going all the way back to 1955 when we didn't know each other, but we know each other now because we have come to this place out of that tradition. So here's Dennis Surrett. Brother, here you go.
I guess that's my time, huh? I'm a socialist. I'm a communist. I'm a troublemaker. I worked for the Bell system at the time I came out of the service in 1963. At that time, in 63, I made that march on Washington. But prior to that, let me just say, I was a person who used to see Malcolm X in the flesh. I used to hear his speaking, and many other leaders in Black Harlem. I saw many of the organizations that came together. A lot of people don't remember Patrice Lumumba. That was my age of consciousness. The Emmett Till situation was my age of consciousness. All that went on in the times of Harlem, I consider myself very lucky to be a part of. I was part of the Black nationalist movement. I got a class perspective after a while, and I began to know that my lifelong work was to be a troublemaker. When I joined the telephone company, the one thing that was clear, we were the odds. They were the largest company at that time in the world. When I joined, I was a token. And in 1967, 68, when the laws started passing, I had an opportunity to organize and to fight racism not only in the company, but in the union too. I took that shot. As a result, when I look back over my 50 years in the telephone company, I was fired 7 times. I had to be that guy who led the charge. And I did it willingly, just like I led it for my brothers and sisters and siblings in Harlem. So I was sort of trained to do that. So when we stepped up, we changed the balance in the telephone company. We started getting people who were now upgraded. We got black and Latino foremen. And let me just say, by the way, I have a black and Latino background. I was raised in a black and Latino, especially Spanish Harlem area when I went to school. And my grandfather came from Venezuela by way of Trinidad. So you do lose your history, your language, and your culture in many of those cases. Because my history, language, and consciousness was all about Harlem in New York. My mother came from Atlanta, and she used to talk about what used to happen down there. So my grandmother came up as a migrant. My grandfather came up on the other side as an immigrant. So that was a good place to be. And I had already been trained, almost just like a dog, a attack dog, to take care of my siblings, and I took that into my workplace. That workplace at one time was all white, and I took it in anyway. And I let them know they can trust me because I had a principle, just like you have a principle. And I stood with it. And there were consequences. But let me tell you a story. There was a point in the late 1960s where we decided to take a position because of the racism in the telephone company in which we were going to have a demonstration. We were going to step out. We were going to be out for 24 hours against all of the racist situations that were going on in the telephone company. And we, just before we did that, with all of our friends, we sat down together, and I say we, and it was black and Latino. And I asked them to talk to nobody but your white friends, because we're going to take an action. And we did. And when one day they came into work, we were all outside with our signs and our flyers. And they asked us, what was this all about, man? These are our friends. And I said, remember what we talked about in there at lunchtime and break time? This is what it's all about, racism. We're taking it on, man. And remember what you said you would do if that was you? It would be nice if you did that. At noontime, they came out and they stated to us, what did this word mean? Because we gave out flyers. And we had 5 demands. And they looked and they went back inside. I can tell you right now, it was a big moment for me. That was a building that held 3,000 people. And at noontime, they were all out with us. We were like a black flies, brown flies in white ointment. For 24 hours, you know, we took a stand that not only the union couldn't stop, but the company couldn't stop either. So we made a statement there. And from that point, I've moved into the CWA. Since that time, I started the Black Caucus of CWA. I was one of the founders of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. I've never, ever denied my socialist and class situation in anything that I've done. And I think that when I was made the educational coordinator, I made a lot of leaders, a lot of leaders. And you can see what that curriculum might be. That curriculum was one thing in terms of what some people might see, and I only invited the very best to my classrooms. So it's just as it was then, it is now. I'm a troublemaker. I will continue to be in retirement, just as the occupiers are doing, and we're going to fight until the end. Thank you very much.
You know, we give these awards to recognize the accomplishments of wonderful people, but we do that also to present models for us and for young people who are here sitting, getting their dissertations, working in the communities, working at the registration tables out here as graduate students. Every generation, every situation has its own demands. And what we need to do today is to figure out together how we meet the demands of today by carrying out the principles of leadership and the principles of integrity and the principles of decency and class analysis that we've had from these two award winners tonight and that we had from Fran Piven, who couldn't be here 2 years ago. We have some work to do, but we know that we have a history of doing this kind of work. We have a history as a people of making progress. You know, they say the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. It's long. You know, it takes a long time to get this stuff done. But it does get done if we keep at it and get out there and bend that arc. That's what we have to do, and that's what these people have been doing for their whole lives, is out there bending that arc. So that's what we're about here. And again, I have to say, I'm grateful to a university that's a public university that still believes in being a public university. And this is what the public is, sitting in this room, that we represent. So tomorrow morning, there's a continuation of the conference. There's a breakfast in this room from 8 until 9. At 9 o'clock, there's a plenary session whose title is the United States in 2012, What's Class Got to Do with It? And we have a roundtable discussion with Bill Fletcher, Juan Gonzalez, Francis Fox Piven, and Bob Herbert. And I'll be up here with them kind of having a conversation. I wish that you would come and participate in that conversation as well. But tonight we have a party going on over here at the Curry Club. We need cars to take people, and we need people who will get into those cars. So why don't we start with getting the cars down here, and if you need a ride, come and see if you can't pick one up. I will say one last thing. You may remember, if you were here 2 years ago, as we were streaming out, people were picking up bottles of wine that were on the back table there because we hadn't drunk them yet. Don't do that. It turns out that that's not our bottles of wine. And when we did that, there was a little bit of trouble and a little bit of controversy about that last year. So please do not walk out here. I noticed that they already cleaned up all the bottles of wine back there. I don't see any around. They weren't taking any chances. But I did say that I would say that. So I hope that you'll be able to get over to the Curry Club and enjoy Barb Jensen's band and a good time there. And thank you all for coming. Have a good evening, and we'll see you here tomorrow morning.